Hello, my name is Elliot of Tool Nerd TV, and welcome to this week's episode of Box to Box Score, where we look at each of the games that have taken place in the IEFSA Premier League and Championships. Moving straight on to Game 1 in the Premier League. We have Fuzzy Warbles against WRI Gavin. Gavin was one of the leaders in the Premier League going into this week, and he's been handed his first defeat of the season by Fuzzy Warbles. Mainly Fuzzy Warbles having contributions from João Moutinho and Sadio Mane, who just seems to have started this season absolutely on fire. Sergio Aguero will have disappointed quite a few people with just an assist this week, but he's also helped Fuzzy to this particular win here. We move on to Game 2, where we have the performance of the week definitely by Roto's Droik with 157 points. Nobody exceeded that total out of anybody this week. He handed Nostradamus his first defeat of the season, so both the undefeated teams going into this week have now been kind of knocked off the perch, as it were. Contributions just everywhere. A huge score from Droik here. We've got Lukaku, of course, top scoring. His 2 goals really kind of kick-starting his season for Manchester United, as well as a double clean sheet bonus kind of from Southampton for Droik here as well. We checked with Nostradamus with regards to Cenk Tosun in his team, because obviously he has Benteke at his disposal as well, and we kind of asked how he differentiated between the two, and he said it's very matchup dependent, and he says he feels like Tosun is a better bet to play every week, but Benteke is putting up periphery numbers more consistently than Tosun. He says all things equal, I have Benteke slightly ahead, especially because he's proved it previously in the Premier League, which actually I find an interesting take, because I watch Benteke and I see a player who just is void of any confidence whatsoever in front of goal. He's missing some chances that he really should be just absolutely burying, and a few years ago may well have buried, but I think his kind of barren run in front of goal is really starting to affect his confidence a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how he does this season, but much longer with such a poor spell, and wouldn't be surprised if Palace would look to move him on and trying to find somebody else who would replace him, because honestly there won't be much more time before they're better than him if they keep him at this kind of performance level. We move on to the next game between Ben Dinnery and Nick Hug. A pretty low scoring game, but really won in the tightest of margins, like less than a point in the end in total. Ben Dinnery just picking up the win, despite heroics from Alex McCarthy of Southampton. Again, that clean sheet against Crystal Palace really proving beneficial for them, but it wasn't enough for him to pick up the win. In this case, David Luiz for Chelsea, their clean sheet against Bournemouth was really the driving force behind Ben's victory in this particular game. And we move on to the next one here. Jason UK with a pretty dominant victory, 131 points against 88 of TA Mac 10. Definitely the principal point scorer for Jason being Rui Patricio, a clean sheet against West Ham, who looked to be in absolute freefall, and Kyle Walker chipping in with a goal. Which I think I heard was the first goal that he scored for Manchester City, which is quite surprising. It was very well taken, but even at Tottenham he didn't score loads of goals, so perhaps expecting goals from him isn't particularly fair, but definitely there for points in terms of assists, because of how he likes to get forward and how often he will probably get forward because of him playing in a Guardiola system. And we move on to the next game. We've got JWL 15 against TR Kingston. A pretty high scoring game this one. JWL managing to pick up the win. Nathan Everidge for Cardiff being the principal kind of point scorer for him. But Mustafi as well, getting a goal in Arsenal's win over Cardiff, which should kind of kickstart their season with an away win. I know obviously they beat West Ham, but it seems like everybody's going to be doing that this season, so that's not really anything to take much pride in. But then we got Rudiger for Kingston, who, I mean, yes, the clean sheet was there, but not enough in this particular case, as was the contribution from David Silva, who, despite another really good game, just not enough to tip him over the line in this particular game. And as for where that leaves us in the Premier League, despite losses for each of Gavin and Nostradamus it's as you were, pretty much. Gavin is still top, just by points differential, whereas you got a few other teams in the mix on 2 wins there as well. And before we move on to the games in the Championship, we're actually going to have a quick message from our sponsors, which is Feline Rough. And if you're looking for that perfect toy for your pet, then Feline Rough started in 2016 to make unique pet toys and provide a fresh take on a stale assortment of cat toys on the market. And with their 100% money back guarantee, you can't afford to not give them a shot. So be sure to find all their offerings on Amazon today. We thank them very much for their sponsorship. We move on to the first game of the Championship, which was Hambazaza against Neil Thurman. Hambazaza, a pretty impressive score. Contributions mostly across the board from quite surprising players, actually, particularly Billing of Huddersfield, who has put himself back on the fancy map again with a goal. Pretty cheap option. He got a goal against Everton this weekend, of course, as well as Troy Deeney, who got himself a goal in their pretty big win over Tottenham. Tottenham players really struggling this week for any sort of points. Obviously defenders would have really struggled, and anyone going forward, Kane and Lucas Moura, who would be pretty popular options, they were absolutely not firing at all. And then you've got Marcus Bettinelli as well, who of course saved a penalty for Fulham. He also contributed quite well to this particular win here for Hambazaza. And we move on to the next game with Fancy Omar, perhaps unlucky not to get the highest score of the week with 150 points, but still doing well enough to win against J4Co. Of course, Fancy Omar had Alexander Mitrovic again, who after his couple of goals last week, he's carried on where he left off pretty much with another goal this weekend against Brighton. Kind of silly giving away the handball penalty right near the end, but he kind of cost himself the win there. But nonetheless, Fulham came out with a point. Fancy Omar's come out with a win. I don't think he particularly cares about the handball near the end there. So we have Rotor Wire Andrew and FPL MNOP in the next game. Pretty low scoring but in tight affair actually, decided by not too many points in the end. James Maddison being the best outfield scorer for Andrew in this particular game. Martin Dubravka, despite conceding a couple of goals for Newcastle this weekend against Man City, he still helped himself to 6 saves and 23 points, which is pretty respectable given the circumstances for him. And then we have a Tom Sunderland against Sports by Gotti. Pretty tight game again. Sports by Gotti getting the win on this particular one. He had Kovacic, who's of course on loan from Real Madrid to Chelsea this season. He contributed to their win against Bournemouth, and we spoke to him about how he felt Kovacic is improving each week, and we checked with him what his ceiling was, and he basically said that he has all the potential of Pogba, but with maybe less goals and assists. His peripheral numbers should be similar each week, which will make him a great dependable option, which I can agree with. I think that Chelsea's options in midfield from a fantasy perspective, we obviously know about the popular ones, Hazard, Willian and Pedro. They're all going to be there as pretty much constants, but the new arrivals, Jorginho and Kovacic, of course, as well, will kind of chip in over time with their statistical success. They've got really good passing numbers. It may only be a matter of time before they start chipping in with goals and assists as well, just so that then people will really kind of sit up and take notice of them. Just as a quick note, I did actually get a quote from Rotowire Andrew from the previous game with regards to Adama Traore. He obviously scored the winning goal for Wolves against West Ham this weekend, and we said he looked good off the bench, and if he carries on starting for Wolves, then would he necessarily make Andrew's lineup? And he said that the only thing faster than Traore with the ball is me locking him into my lineup if he becomes a regular starter for Wolves, which again, that's an interesting take on things, because with Traore, he came into the Premier League a couple of years ago with Middlesbrough, and his pace and everything he seemed like he had all of the tools to really frighten defenders and make them just fear playing him, but he had no end product whatsoever. His crossing really left a lot to be desired, and he just wasn't a good fancy option at all. But if he can kind of become less of a raw product with Wolves, then he'll definitely be one to kind of keep an eye on this season. He could turn out to be a gamble worth taking for Wolves in this particular case. We move on to the final game with Gary Irwin picking up a win against CJ Radun, 148 points. Very convincing win in this particular game. Joe Hart of Burnley, he may have conceded a couple of goals against Manchester United, but he saved that penalty against Paul Pogba this weekend, so that's helped him to 29 points, which is very respectable given the circumstances. And he was also helped by his defence this weekend, with Bowley and Vestergaard getting themselves a 20-point haul each. So that is it for the Championship games. We look at the tables, and it is very crowded. We've got 4 teams on 3 wins, and you could honestly throw a blanket on basically the top 7, because anyone is basically in with a shout. Even CJ Radun, with 0 wins to his name so far this season, he'll definitely feel like he can turn it around, because it is a very long season. But that's going to be it for this week. Obviously, there is no video next week because there is an international break, no Premier League games being played next weekend, which means I will be back in a couple of weeks' time. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, then please do subscribe to the Tall Nerd TV YouTube channel, where you'll be obviously notified of any new uploads. And by all means, follow the IEFSA on Twitter, where you can find out all the information about the matches being played each week. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.